Welcome to the Academic Woman Amplified podcast. I'm your host, Kathy Mazak, tenured full professor, mom of three, and firm believer that the culture of academia needs to change radically. Women are revolutionizing academia within institutions that were not built for us. If you're ready to reject the culture of overwork, kick guilt and overwhelm to the curb, and amplify your voice to make a real impact on your field without breaking down or burning out, you're in the right place. And it all starts with writing. Let's go. Picture the stereotype of the lone professor. I remember when I was a kid and I thought about what a college professor looked like. And I pictured actually pretty much my actual college professor. So even before I knew him, I had an English department college professor at Indiana University named Ray Hedden. And he was a great professor. He also really embodied that kind of like stereotype of especially, I think, the humanities professor, but I do think it cuts across fields. He would wear a tweed jacket. He had long hair, but it was a little bald on the top, and his hair was kind of wiry and crazy. And his office was filled with stacks of books. And I never saw him in the context where he was working with another professor. Really, all of the professors in the English department at Indiana in the 90s were kind of holed in their little individual offices. And that kind of image of a college professor, I think, like if you go to Google and you search Google images for college professor, you're often going to get that kind of male, wire-rimmed glasses, maybe slightly disheveled hair, a tweed jacket or button down with a sweater on top. All of these people apparently work in cold places because they're always dressed in a lot of clothes. And that is like the stereotype of the professor. And there's kind of a lone wolf quality to that stereotype as well. And that is a pervasive stereotype, I think, throughout the culture of academia. And maybe I don't even want to use stereotype. I want to use the word that, or something that more encapsulates, that is what is held up as quote unquote normal, right? That is what the maybe not stereotypical, maybe typical professor is. Male, older, and kind of, this idea that you're like so into the scholarship that you're kind of like head down, worried about intellectual problems all day. Maybe you end up staying late in your office. That's kind of the typical thing that I think the typical professor is painted to be, I guess I'll say, inside of academia. And the lonely part of that, or I'll say the lone part of that professor image is really important. We are taught inside of and socialized inside of the culture of academia to be self-reliant, but almost toxically self-reliant. So yes, like in our PhD programs, we are there, we're learning from our professors in classrooms with other people. We're in cohorts together. We might even be asked to do group projects. And of course, like in labs, labs are teams full of people, right? But there's always this edge to the idea of how you're supposed to operate alone as a scholar. There's this messaging that we get that says, if you're smart enough, you'll figure it out. And there's this kind of almost shame around asking questions. And that shame exists at the same time as the supposed, right, culture of inquiry and investigation exists inside of academia. So yes, we're supposed to inquire. We're supposed to think of new ideas. We're supposed to question things. But at the same time, there's not a lot of valuing of relying on each other for help or saying, I don't know, or I don't understand. or can you help me? What do you do? Because I would like to know how you're figuring this out so that I can maybe figure it out. That part of learning is often like shunned in academia. I think obviously like that's not true all the time, but that there is this pervasive idea that I think we get in graduate school that is you need to know how to do it by yourself first. And the underlying idea there is if you can't figure it out or you can't do it, then maybe you're just not smart enough to be here, right? So think about how that idea is reinforced. During the doctoral degree, for example, there's a lot of lonely days in the library and nobody can read things but you, right? I mean, you're not sitting around in groups reading academic articles out loud to each other. So reading is also very solitary. And there's a lot of it, right, in our academic lives, and especially in that prepping for comprehensive exams and prepping for the dissertation time in our career. So we learn to be by ourselves. We learn that the inquiry that we're doing is alone and maybe even lonely. There's other ways that the culture of academia also kind of emphasizes that you need to be able to do things by yourself, or kind of puts the lone wolf, I guess, or the lone scholar on a pedestal. And one of those ways is how tenure systems value solo authored publications above other kinds of publications. So this, again, is especially true in non-science fields. In science, you see much more, teams. In STEM, for example, you'll see, whole teams of people authoring things together. But even so, in those situations, you need to be the first author, or the last author. Sometimes the primary author is the last author. Those kinds of publications, the ones where you stand out, are the ones that are valued. And then in other fields, in non-STEM fields, the solo authored publications are at the top of the pile, at the top of with the most prestige, right? In your bid for tenure or your bid for full, having solo authored publications, solo authored books, those are the things that count. They count more. There's more currency in that solo authored publication. So we learn to be by ourselves. We learn to be the lone scholar. And then that gets reinforced throughout our careers. Of course, writing is also solitary so much of the time, almost all the time. Part of the struggle with writing is that the act of getting something out of your head and onto the page is between you and the blinking cursor, right? It's between you and the page. And that can feel very lonely and very lone, right? So even if you're co-authoring a paper, you're not usually in the same room writing at the same time, right? The co-authoring is not usually done where everybody's together and they're like talking about ideas, and then somebody's writing, and then maybe the next person writes while people continue to talk about ideas. That's not how co-writing typically happens. Instead, it happens like hot potato style, right? Like I'll write this part, then I'll pass it to you, and you write the next part, and then I'll pass it to you, and we'll pass it back and forth. But we're not doing it at the same time. We're not doing it together, right? We're doing it parallel to each other, alone. Writing the dissertation is that first very lonely act of writing that launches you into your academic writing career at the level of professor, right? You must do your dissertation by yourself, even though academics who do lab work know that you're never truly doing an experiment alone, right? But even so, the words on the page must come from your brain and your brain alone. And it's the same thing when you work with your advisor or your committee. You put the words on the page, you turn the words into them, they give you feedback, you incorporate the feedback. It's hot potato. It's not really working together at the level of togetherness that might be possible, right? So this solitary nature of writing is also why it can be really difficult to keep a date with your writing, because you're just keeping a date with yourself. And on that date, if you don't have a great relationship with your writing, we're taking this metaphor all the way. If you don't have a great relationship with your writing, the date can be scary. It can be like, well, I don't really want to be alone with my thoughts and try to get them on the page in a way that sounds like what I want it to sound like, or that communicates what I want to communicate. And if that's what you feel about your writing, then of course it's hard to keep a date with your writing. And there's no one else there to, do it with you. It has to come from your brain and onto the page. So, it's really lonely. Writing can be a truly lonely act. Because of that loneliness, that lonely aspect of writing, or the lone aspect of writing, writing together, truly writing together, is a radical idea. Women writing together is an even more radical idea, because that act of solidarity, of lifting each other up, of standing together and getting your voice heard in academic culture is super powerful, because you're making yourself heard and you're also leaning on the community that you're developing with other women to make noise or get your voice out inside of academic culture that has traditionally devalued women's voices. And that is really, really powerful. Writing together is a radical idea. But what do I mean by writing together? I mean writing at the same time. I mean sitting in a actual or metaphorical room and writing together, like doing the act of writing. And that includes all the pre-writing stuff and the outlining, and it could be reading and all the things I talk about all the time when I talk about what is writing. Doing it at the same time in the same place, whether it's a virtual place or an actual place. I had experienced the power of co-working through some business programs that I had taken part in. And what I loved about co-working was that it made me keep my butt in the chair. It made me sit and pay attention to what I was doing. But it also gave me this sense of doing work together. And that was really amazing. I found that even if I was co-working with other entrepreneurs on something, via Zoom, muted, but we were doing work on whatever aspect of our business at the same time, that gave me that impetus that usually I could only get by putting a writing session inside my Soaring State. And if you want to hear more about Soaring State, you can go back to our previous episodes. But basically, Soaring State means your best, most energetic time of day, which I encourage everyone to use for their writing. So last year in May, we began a big experiment. My team thought, well, what would happen if we developed a community of women whose core purpose was to write together? Would writing side by side via Zoom be powerful enough to help participants keep that date with their writing? So that's the idea behind co-writing. We hold space for you to write together. And very simply, here's what that co-writing holding space looks like. We have a Zoom room, and during an hour, which is like one co-writing session is about an hour, we all get on the Zoom together. We stay muted the whole time. In the chat, we put our goals, then we work. There might be a mid-hour check-in in the chat. And then at the end, we say to each other what we accomplished. And during that hour, we're sitting there with the Zoom on. Some people have their cameras on, some people don't. but we're together in a virtual space writing. And what we've found by doing this in a group is that people have been able to keep dates with their writing, partially because it doesn't feel so lonely anymore. Yes, it is you and the blinking cursor, or you and that dense piece of reading that you need to get through before you can put words on the page. But you're doing it with other people. And just that is really powerful because it is women doing it together. So we started out with this idea, let's have a couple of times each day where we do this kind of co-writing and hold space there. After we did that for just a few weeks, we added the ability to leave that Zoom room open so that members of the community could make their own dates and times to meet. So that if you were like, oh, I really got to work on this thing today, you could just like go into our Facebook group and say, who else wants to get on the Zoom at this time? I'm going to be working on X. And you could go and meet there together without having to have it pre-scheduled, right? There was like an always open space that we hold for members of this community. Turns out the members liked hanging out together, even in silence. And so some people asked like, well, could we talk during the co-writing sessions? Could there be like unmuted time? We decided against that. But instead, what we did was we created a weekly 30-minute meeting where one of our writing coaches, right now it's Rocio because she's leading that program right now, creates a set of prompts that help you think about and kind of get your head right in the right place for the week about your writing. So everybody shows up on the Zoom, she gives you the prompts, and then everybody goes to breakout rooms of 3 or 4 people and talks through the prompts, answers the prompt questions, and then comes back for like a 5-minute debrief at the end, and you're on your way. It's like a way to get a little infusion of community and support and to get to know the other co-writing members better because, you know, the people that you see in the co-writing rooms, now you get to like talk to them on Mondays. And it started out with just maybe 10, 15 people coming to those. We call them momentum mindset meetings. At first, just a few people came. Now we get 50 people sometimes coming to those momentum mindset meetings that then break into groups and get to interact together and talk about writing as a craft, as a practice. As we kept developing this community, again, that we call it momentum, it's a co-writing community. As we continued over this last year to develop the community, we added scheduled co-writing sessions. We call them soaring sessions. And now we have 6 each day. But the point that I want to make here is the radical nature of togetherness, the radical aspect of women joining together in community in order to do something that systemically we are prevented from doing or discouraged from doing or find it difficult to do. And that is make time to write. And the reason that systemically it's difficult for us to make time to write, especially as women, is because we know that women take on more service burden inside of their departments. We know that people who identify as women face more gender discrimination in the workplace, inside of academia, and have traditionally been uncited or ignored, or their contributions have actually only gotten voice or have been taken by men and given voice through the voices of men rather than women, directly being credited for their work. And this has happened over and over again. It continues to happen, sometimes in more subtle ways, sometimes not, throughout academic institutions. So the fact that we come together to do something which amplifies our voices, and that's writing, is a radical act. I think of momentum as a radical community. It's people who are saying, yes, I will lean on you and I will take your weight as you lean on me. Because together we can be more effective. We can be louder. Together, we can hold space for each other, the space that academia doesn't hold for us. We can do it ourselves here in this community. And that is why women writing together is radical. That holding space, that we're going to do it and we're going to do it together. And that is the radicalness of it. That is the bucking of the norm. Instead of saying, I'm the lone scholar, I need to do it by myself, or sometimes that voice inside your head that says, if I can't figure out how to keep a date with my writing, then I'm weak or I'm dumb or whatever other bad messages we give ourselves. Instead, we create a space where it's easy for you to keep a date with your writing because we put the date on the calendar for you and we're holding that space with other women and saying, come in here. We're here waiting for you. So I want to encourage you that if you are having difficulty finding time to write, because this is a problem, the number one problem of academics who find my podcast, I think, is making time to write. If that's a problem that you're having, I encourage you to join our Momentum community. Momentum is just $27 a month, and you can cancel anytime. There's 6 meetings a week for co-writing and an always open co-writing room. The 6 meetings are in no way meant to put pressure on you to come every day or to come multiple times a day or anything. They are just meant to have many times for people to choose from where that space is being held for writing. We actually encourage you to choose 1 or 2 sessions per week to commit for yourself to coming to those sessions, and we'll be there waiting for you to hold you up, to lift you up, and to hold that space for you to do what you know you need to do, which is pay attention and love on your writing. I hope to see you inside of Momentum. We are enrolling all the time. We especially feel like this is a great time in the semester to enroll. The reason is that many of you are in that moment of the semester where you're like, oh my gosh, this is horrible. I can't make it. There's too much, that kind of cycle of the semester, that mid-semester where, like, I call it the moment where the semester hits the fan and you're like, I'm just barely making it. This is the perfect time to join a community. And this is the perfect time to have space held for you where you can just come on in and you can use that co-writing time for writing. Obviously, you can use it for words on the page writing. You can use it for any other aspects of writing, including getting through readings that you want to get done, outlining, coding, any of the activities that are going to lead you to get writing on the page. We have members use the co-writing sessions for those. And even when you just can't anymore with grading, we have people use the co-writing sessions for grading. And so the beauty of that is that you get to decide what you need in terms of that space being held for you. Of course, this is not a co-grading space, but if that's what you need, you are smart enough and mature enough to decide that for yourself. And so you get to decide what work you do inside of that co-writing time, and we will support you as you do it. So I hope to see you in Momentum. You can sign up at kathymazak.com/momentum. Come be radical with us. We'll see you there. Thank you so much for spending your valuable time loving on yourself and your writing by listening to this episode. If you're feeling pulled in 1,000 directions and can't seem to carve out time to write, I've got a solution for you. Go grab my 10 ways to make time to write cheat sheet. Just go to kathymazak.com/podcast-time to learn my best quick tips for putting writing at the center of your career where it belongs. We'll link that up in the show notes. Just go to kathymazak.com/podcast-time.